welcome to this. Let me read the exact title of the session. So this session is about disaster risk reduction and the role of data to evidence and structure disaster risk reduction strategies. So I don't know if you read a little bit the resume, but over the past 10 years there's been a lot of development in DRR, but it's still seen a very specialist domain, and tools and data that could be available for non-specialists to understand the situation are not always super clear. And today we're going to present maybe initiatives and tools and open data initiatives for non-specialists to better understand the risks in the region they're working. Hoping I'm not introducing too badly. So we're going to start with Emlyn from IMMAP that will present the role of data to evidence and structure DRR strategies.
Good morning. That was the copy-paste of the title. So I'm Emlyn. I'm the DRR lead for IMMAP and the manager of the Afghanistan Spatial Data Center. I'm here actually to learn a lot from my fellow panelists and perhaps from you, because we need some solutions, because the humanitarian community, we're always facing the same challenges, and I'm going to start with a few examples. So a few years ago I made the NATO Afghanistan flood hazard map. It's the most detailed flood map of Afghanistan available, and it's now been on the market for 6 years. And with it, you basically can, if you're going to build a school and our flood map says, well, don't build it there, you better not do that. So NATO is not generally an organization that likes to share data, but I convinced them and the team was supportive. All NATO member states says, yes, let's do this. And they put out the propaganda machine. So press interviews, talking to the vice presidents, DRR, International DRR Day. World Bank got copies, all the UN agencies. So we basically did a broad PR campaign, and we gave the data to everybody. 6 years later, the humanitarian community is still building schools and hospitals in flood zones. They're still building refugee camps in flood zones. It is frustrating. This is not good. So you produce scientific, accurate data on which you're pretty proud, and nobody's using it. Although you put in all the effort to disseminate this information to the larger humanitarian community. That is frustrating, and it's bad practice. Another example, school and hospitals. So I spent the past few months cleaning up the hospital data set of Afghanistan, and there were about 3,200 hospitals. Somehow there were lots of Afghan hospitals located in China and India, on top of mountains in the middle of lakes. The data was not accurate. So we cleaned that data up. And we shared that data back to WHO and the Ministry of Public Health. Now, there's other organizations that also have hospital data. One agency has 1,000 hospital data, and I can recognize it immediately. It's data of 2009, and it includes still hospitals located on the top of mountains in the middle of lakes. But how can an end user of various platforms decide which data is more accurate? That other organizations, they show school data. It's highly inaccurate data. We have, as IMMAP, because we work with all the humanitarian actors in Afghanistan, we've got access to quite good data. So we have most of the school data, but we don't visualize it and we don't share it because we don't have enough confidence. But there's other players in the market that simply say, okay, we found on Google somewhere school data of Afghanistan, let's share it to the humanitarian community. If you share incorrect hospital and school data, especially hospital data, people can die. Your emergency operations run not as smoothly and as accurately. So that's, again, frustrating. That yellow dot there, that's the location of the village. About 5% of all villages in Afghanistan are located smack middle in the river. Fantastic. So what do you do with this information? How do you clean it up? Other players on the market, oops, sorry. Risk evaluation. So how do you evaluate risk? We assess, because we've calculated the population data for Afghanistan, for each area we can say, oh, this is your flood zone. Your village might be located in here, but we mapped the build-up areas and we say, okay, there's no build-up areas in a flood risk. But from your arable lands, about, let's say, 20% of it is in a flood zone. It's a rather accurate assessment, ballpark estimate. Now there's other methodologies in which about this year alone, $250 million is going to be disseminated and distributed to the various provinces in Afghanistan based on a flawed methodology, because those, in this case a UN agency, is using a flawed methodology how to assess and allocate risks. It's problematic. It's again frustrating because we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars that is going to be moved to the incorrect province where there's less risk, where less people are endangered, instead of actually allocated it to the areas where more people would benefit from this aid. Again, it's frustrating. So with these experience and looked at many data portals and many solutions offered by the humanitarian and private industries, when I started on this project, I really wanted to have the Afghanistan flood data to be used to actually make an impact. And so we made some assessments. So we wanted to provide a full picture, not of all the natural disasters. So we look at floods, at flash floods, avalanche risk, and earthquake. Earthquake data comes from USGS. And on those topics we have the most accurate data available. And we have nice population data, and that's important, right? Because people working within the DRR community, like I did in the past, I made a nice flood map, gave it to the humanitarian community, and said, don't build in flood zones. It's not difficult. But of course, that analysis is too complicated for many people to do it themselves. So you need to give them the tools. If a flood happens in the middle of the desert, who cares? But as soon as there's people living there, as soon as there's a hospital or infrastructure, then this becomes important. So we modeled the population of Afghanistan. The UN and the government of Afghanistan, they have population data at district level. It's frustrating. You can't really prioritize your work with that. If you don't have population data at the village level, even modeled data, how are you going to do your prioritization of your work? Now these two components are often the elements that comprise the DRR program. But it's not sufficient if you're building a toolkit for people to work in DRR. It's too narrow. Your user market, you're becoming a niche product for only DRR. You need to have something that has broader appeal, and for that we made access. So if you're gonna that's not gonna work. So while I was working in Jordan, it was important for our desert operations to find out where do you have mobile phone coverage. That's kind of practical. If you need to travel to a village, to know if your crew, if your local crew will have mobile phone coverage, that's practical. Access. For each village in Afghanistan, we calculated the travel time to the nearest airport, distance and time to the nearest large, medium and small hospital. And of course, to be able to calculate that, we had to create the most accurate road network of Afghanistan. But it's worthwhile, because suddenly you're not focusing anymore solely on the DRR component, you're reaching out, and suddenly your information can be used for emergency response. And unfortunately, Afghanistan is such a nice neighborhood that you need humanitarian access data, incidents. If you need to go visit, help people in a certain village, it's kind of practical to know what has happened along the road in the past 3 months, year. How many kidnappings have there been? How many roadside bombings? About 90 of such incidents happen a day. We have staff digitizing them. 90 a day, we have more than 135,000 incidents. That is for any humanitarian operation in Afghanistan. Nobody does anything without talking to their security manager. Not even for a trip to the supermarket. And that is crucial to have that information. Also, if you have the data, then show it, because it gives you the full picture. Now, we have built a GeoNode. It's just a tool at the end of the day, and that's important. It's always about the data. So the statistics tool is, you click in it, and on the right hand side a menu pops up. And what you can do there is basically you can calculate the statistics either for a province, a district, or you draw your own area. You press apply, and for that area it will tell you population, breakdown in various land cover classes, the area size, how many hospitals there are, how many roads there are, how many floods, people in flood risks areas there are. That's good for planning purposes. We also do flood forecast every 6 hours. Avalanche risk, earthquake risk, accessibility, tons of information, and security data. Well, let me quickly show how that actually works. So this is a small video. We go to a specific province. We press apply. And an agency can't tell you how many hospitals there are within this province in 2 days. We can give you that within 30 seconds. And here we're going to analyze the flood risk within this area. Yeah, let's look at that. It will tell you there's approximately 2,000 people living in there, and of those 2,000, 780 live in a flood risk zone. That's kind of useful if you're doing DRR mitigation planning. That's pretty nifty. And it doesn't stop there. We can also tell you that in the past 5 years there have been 88 murders or casualties due to incidents, or that 20% of your population lives more than 2 hours away from the nearest hospital. You might decide to build a small medical facility there, because that was also important. We have the data, and then you need to provide the tools to make this accessible to your user community. That was one of the missions of this panel discussion. So we mentioned these humanitarian access data, the amount of casualties, injured, and the description of each incident. For my staff in Afghanistan, it's not a nice job. This is depressing if you do this 5 days a week, having to tell where people have been killed. Road accessibility. All these red areas, they're more than 8 hours away from the nearest hospital. That's practical information. Now, if there's nobody living in those red areas, it's not a problem. But as soon as there's big settlements, 50,000 people without hospital access, you can either build a road or you build a new hospital. This is kind of practical. In Afghanistan, 4.1 million people live more than 8 hours away from the nearest airport. It's up to the decision makers in the humanitarian community or the World Bank to decide if they're going to invest in a new airport. This tool can help them. Now, if we make a map for our custom maps for our user community in Afghanistan, it takes us between 4 hours and 2 days to make a decent map. In our online system, you can make a professional looking map at A1 size in various formats, A3, A2, A4, with a few clicks of a mouse. It really takes you 4 minutes to make a decent looking map, which you can include in your reports. So we provide a full picture. We provide relevant data, we provide easy access tool, and we have good print functionalities and all the things that people would actually need to do a successful planning, monitoring and evaluation, disaster response project. It is pretty complete. Now we track all our users. and we track them through which organizations are using which type of data. We also provide access through WMS, so all our data can be accessed in ArcGIS. And we still provide hard copy maps, and we track everybody, like Big Brother. Oh, let's. And this is starting to become frustrating a bit. I'm pretty convinced we have good data. You give a presentation and people are excited about it. They really get engaged with it. Sometimes they even clap. It's nice. But then they're not using it. That's frustrating. You come to this conference and you see all these nice presentations and you think while you're listening to them, oh, I should look this up. By the time you get back to your office, you've forgotten about it. It's the same with this tool, except the people who are building DRR projects underground, building gabion walls, building hospitals, they should be using this. Because it's not that there's an alternative source of information. This is pretty much it. So looking at that and seeing the frustration that people are not, again, using our tools. It's more of a luck, right? I meet somebody at the airport for 5 minutes and suddenly he's our most heavy user. Then I give to a large organization 5 presentations in front of 20 people. They're not using it, although they need it. It's not that they don't like it. It's just that to break down these organizational barriers is difficult, and I think that's a challenge we all face with our project. Now we're trying to circumvent that, and I'm a scientist. I'm not into marketing. Unfortunately, to make my project a success, I have to look at how to bridge this gap to my end users. So we have an extensive training program. It's expensive to hire an international and a few training staff to give 1 to 3 days trainings. And then they get 5 days of training or 3 days, and they're still not using it. But the guy or the girl you meet at a meeting and you talk to them for 5 minutes, suddenly they're a user. Is that luck? It's kind of frustrating. We have 1.5 hour videos online, also in the local language. It shows you in 1.5 hours you can see everything these tools can do for you. We have certifications. So we give people certificates. It's a complicated process. It's not easy. It's interactive. We don't give the certificate away for free. So there's an incentive for them to get this. There's a nice USAID logo, and this is important for people to get jobs in Afghanistan. So that's one of our options of outreach. The other is language. So this shows you the snow coverage in Afghanistan. On each village you can click and you get population data, nearest hospitals, but also the current snow depth that screenshot was taken was between 75 centimeters and 2 meters. And the same for flood risk. Now that's kind of useful information, but if it's not available in your local language, it's very difficult to reach your market, because we'll never be able to go out in the provinces or districts. It's too dangerous. So how do we reach the decision makers, the local decision makers who don't speak English? We're going to send out push service. So as soon as an earthquake happens, 1.5 hours after the earthquake event, we can show you the hotspots where you should prioritize your helicopters to. Fully automated. If an earthquake happens at 3 o'clock at night, by 4:30 in the morning, you should receive the email with the map, with the statistics. I think this is the key to gain your audience. And the other thing is ownership. So we work together with not just these organizations, with most humanitarian actors, but how do you make sure they embrace your product? It's about ownership. For an organization to include an IMMAP statistics report with a US8 and an IMMAP logo, yeah, it's very useful data, but I have to show this to my manager. It might be a bit of a stretch. So we want to give the option to include UNICEF, their own logos in there. It sounds silly, but this is within the humanitarian community. The sense of ownership, if the World Bank is funding a project, they want to see their logo on it. It is important. And it hopefully binds your audience. Now, these are my strategies to overcome, hopefully overcome, to make sure that people are using these tools to the best of their ability. And I'm looking for other creative solutions, because I'm not sure if this is going to cut it. Thanks.
Thanks a lot for the presentation. It was really interesting. Do we already have questions from the room?
Sure. A question. Apart from the interface, apart from the database, one of the weak points in all this system is not to create a database, but then put in place a mechanism to update this data. Most of that layer of information, they are dynamic. So the number of hospitals, the number of demography, the roads, they are changing constantly. So which system you have to update the data?
So just to give you an idea, we update data at regular intervals. Let's say hospital data, that's being revised every 3-4 months, because we work together with WHO. Our flood data is updated every hour, valid for the next 6 hours. River floods every 6 hours for the next 4 days. Snow coverage data, daily snow coverage depth and coverage, avalanche risk daily. We check for earthquakes every 5 minutes, and it takes, after a heavy earthquake, it takes about 1.5 hours for us to compute the affected people. So that is a live product. Accessibility, you saw those red areas. We currently have, out of 45,000 villages, 2,000 which are not more than 5 kilometers away from the nearest road. So I have 3 staff that are digitizing the roads right now to ensure that these will also be integrated, so we can actually plan for them.
They are digitizing the roads, but the information about the condition of roads,
we, in Afghanistan, nobody's in the ground anymore, even the UN, and they outsource their stuff. We base travel estimates, we calibrate it with field staff, but we base it on topography, road sinuosity, curviness, the amount of river crossings you have, how much rivers you have to pass through, how many villages, build-up areas you have to pass through. You generally need to slow down, the type of geological layers. So that is, we make estimates. We're currently off on average about between either 20% too slow or 20% too fast. It's close enough. Our population data, if we say that in a specific area there's 4,000 people, that might be 4,400. It's close enough, because very often what we see is, and this is a real example, somebody builds a gabion wall and they claim this project is saving 20,000 lives, 5,000 houses, 120,000 livelihoods. Great, good investment of a 300-meter flood wall. That's worthwhile.
In case you are not updating this data, so you are telling that the demography is an approximation based on the last census, and maybe not.
No, we use various methodologies to recalculate population data, because the last census was in 1979.
Yeah,
so, but basically we can assess that there's nobody living in water bodies. No, we can assess that there's less people living in desert areas and more people living in irrigated land. That most people live in build-up areas. Now we have this land cover data, so you can distribute your population accordingly. But back to the gabion wall example, we look at that gabion wall project. It's not in a flood zone. I calculated the flood zone, but I know my data can be wrong. Fine. In the past 10 years, there has not been one flood in that village. Then again, that data might be wrong. My calculations say there's not 20,000 people, but 3,800. My model data can be wrong. But I can look at the satellite imagery, right? And the satellite imagery shows me that there's not 5,000 houses, there are around 400 houses, which would be around 4,000 people. But people use these numbers to attract funds, to build something for a highly inflated DRR project. If somebody else comes along and says, I have a project that saves 20,000 lives with one gabion wall, and the other person says, my project saves 15,000 lives with one gabion wall, the World Bank is going to decide, I assume, to give it the money to the one who saves 20,000 lives. But if these numbers are inaccurate, you need some type of baseline for the planning and the monitoring and evaluation. And if that baseline is not in existence, you have a problem. So, and that's one of the things we try to solve, to give people the tools to actually do this evaluation. Because I don't want that my tool is being used for the monitoring and evaluation. I want it to be used for the planning. But if people are not using it for the planning, I'm hoping that other organizations will use it as a stick during the monitoring and evaluation period, because that is crucial. Thanks.
Okay, hi. So I work for the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery, which is a multi-donor initiative hosted by the World Bank. It operates on funds from the World Bank, from the EU, from the African Caribbean Partnership, Pacific Partnership, from individual country governments. And we largely support regional teams within the World Bank who are helping individual countries perform disaster risk assessments, or help those teams to build risk assessments into agricultural projects, or school redevelopment projects and school retrofit projects. So we're a group of technical specialists in Earth observation, risk modelling, geospatial data, and we work within those different projects to ensure best practice on risk modelling and risk assessment. So what we spend a lot of time doing is creating risk information. That can be hazard information, vulnerability, new asset exposure information, producing maps of those and sharing those data to develop increased understanding that the information exists, best practices on how to use them and how to communicate the information. And that feeds through to financial planning for government in terms of financial response, budget planning. It feeds through to building preparedness initiatives within countries, a whole range of different aims. So part of our work is to produce these best practice documents, and these are all available on the GFDRR.org website. They cover things from production of open data, crowdsourced mapping trainings, risk modelling information, reviews of open source tools that are available for risk modelling. So to talk a bit about creating data, the traditional approach, and one that still occurs, is quite consultant driven. A country requires some risk information, so they recruit either directly or through someone like GFDRR international consultants with the technical expertise to go away and produce a flood map, an earthquake map, map exposure, and produce the required risk outputs. Someone like IMMAP. Often it can be quite an opaque process. It can be delivered in the output data sets and a report, but the details of how they've gone about the process can be quite opaque. It can be expensive. You're talking tens of thousands of dollars at least to prepare a very high level risk assessment for a single hazard. If you're talking about producing that for multiple hazards, with the detail that we saw in the Afghanistan tool there, you can be talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you're talking about regions, it can get up to that sort of value. Often, with that approach, consultants delivering data and delivering reports to the client, the country, those data can be left on the shelf. They might be used a few times later on, or not at all. and that is a problem that you've seen with Afghanistan. Not enough people using the data, the valuable data that's been created and been invested in. So we end up with recurring costs for developing the same data or similar data for projects where that data could be reused. And it's not sustainable for someone like GFDRR funding it. It's not sustainable for the whole DRM community who have a limited amount of time and resource and funding to produce these data sets. So what we would like to do is to be producing higher quality risk assessments elsewhere rather than reproducing the same data. And the issue of maintenance of data and data becoming out of date is obviously one that exists there as well. So GFDRR, we're trying to push this new solution. It's not a brand new solution. Everyone's trying to work this way to enable the resources to be used more wisely, to develop data so it's used by more people, so more people know about the data and are aware enough of the risks and how to use the data in managing those risks. So we're talking about collaborative processes, getting the clients or communities buy-in and involvement in developing the data to build the understanding and capacity to use that data right from the very start. It also directs how the data is developed for particular uses. These types of approaches can mean that one process can be scaled from a single country to multiple countries, ultimately, hopefully, being applicable across regions, and that doesn't make every approach applicable at that regional scale, but if that's what's required, then scalability can be built in from the start. One of the programs that GFDRR supports is Open Data for Resilience, and they get involved in a lot of community mapping, organising training and community mapping exercises that feed into things like OpenStreetMap. So I'm sure you guys from the humanitarian sector are aware of the increase in data in quite a short period after the Haiti earthquake, during the Ebola crisis. These are just some screen grabs from OpenStreetMap in Haiti and Monrovia, and then a month later, or a few weeks later, the vast increase in asset data that's then available in OpenStreetMap. So that's one of the best examples, I think, of harnessing participation of a community to deliver data for wider use. And it's something that that really should be tried to be replicated elsewhere to really gain the maximum number of users. In terms of other types of data, we're creating a lot of hazard data. There's a lot of hazard data that exists within industry, in the reinsurance industry, who then keep the data as intellectual property and are hard to persuade to share that data more widely. Within research organisations who might develop the data for a specific use and either not see the use in other applications or get diverted onto other projects before they have a chance to fully share the data. So we're working with a lot of governments to develop GeoNodes and move data onto GeoNodes and make those data openly available. And there's a few examples here. Haiti, Malawi, there's the Ebola GeoNode, various different sites with hazard data, asset data on there, so roads, hospital sites, schools. Through World Bank projects in Kyrgyzstan, there are new GeoNodes being developed, and data that's developed in the course of that risk assessment is then posted onto that spatial data repository for wider access. We're building our own. We have our own GeoNode at the GFDRR Innovation Lab, and any projects that we fund and commission risk data to be built within is shared via that GeoNode. So we're trying to build that as a resource for wide use, and that will continue to grow. So at the moment we've populated it with Eastern Central Asia region for earthquake and flood mapping, or flood risk modelling, for up to 9 countries in Africa, for the Southwest Indian Ocean islands. So that's something that continues to grow, and we're using that data in our tools in-house, but it's also designed to be accessed by many other people. So to move on to some risk modelling tools, this is a tool called InnoSafe, which was developed in partnership with Australian Aid and the World Bank, GFDRR, and Indonesian authorities. And it works as a plugin to open source GIS. It works in QGIS. So it's available as a plugin there. It takes in hazard data, takes in asset data, and produces, similar to the Afghanistan model, number of hospitals, number of population, number of or length of roads that are exposed to whichever hazard you've overlaid that data with. So it's quite a simple mechanism to make initial risk assessments and produce the number of assets that are exposed. As part of the InnoSafe project, there's a lot of training and workshops that go on. There's a lot of capacity building. So the tool is available online, but a big part of rolling the tool out for decision makers to use it by themselves is that training. And you gave excellent examples of video tutorials and workshops, and it's something that in commissioning risk assessments, consultants often see as an afterthought. So as we commission risk assessments now, we're making that a bigger component of the bidding process. So consultants have to collaborate with people on the ground, with organisations on the ground, and have to plan in these training workshops rather than going and delivering the output, but actually spending days taking the user or the potential clients through how to build this, how to use the tool, so that they have the capacity to go and continue using it themselves afterwards. But yeah, I don't think it's something that's done enough at the moment. So the final section of the presentation is about this new hazard screening tool that we've developed. One of the main problems and one of the issues still with InnoSafe is that this requires understanding of hazard, of exposure data, of vulnerability, and the concepts of risk modelling to get the outputs, and then to be able to use them in their projects. With Think Hazard, we've taken a bit of a step back. So we've built this tool to raise awareness of multiple hazards across the globe at a national level and subnational level. So what it allows non-hazard experts to do is to assess the level of hazards in their project location. And it's quite a generic tool, so it's not tailored to a specific type of project. It's been built with the development sector in mind, so it's non-project specific, so people can use it for pipeline construction, agricultural projects, schools projects, really anything. It can be applicable immediately in the humanitarian sector for people who just want to get an initial idea of what hazards exist. So it doesn't go through to risk, so it doesn't address the assets and the people who are exposed to those hazards as the Afghanistan tool does and InnoSafe does, and it doesn't address the social problems that were discussed for Haiti. What it provides is a very simple workflow. So the user on the homepage types in a location. That might be a country, it might be the first level administrative unit or the second level administrative unit. And it works for these 8 hazards, and actually they're a bit clearer on the next page. So once the user types in a location, they're taken to that location of choice. And on this screen they see immediately different hazard levels for 8 hazards, and we're currently looking to expand it to extreme heat, urban flood and wildfire, so there'll be 11 hazards in there. And it is natural hazards only at this stage. What we've effectively done here is take in raw hazard data, so the parameters such as peak ground acceleration, wind speed, and converted that into a view of what the potential is for damage from those hazards. So we're using this tool to take away the interpretation or the translation process of, okay, so this hazard map tells me at this location, on average once in 100 years, I'll have wind speeds of X meters per second. And we're doing the translation of whether that means there will be damage in that area from that hazard. So we do that for each of the hazards in slightly different ways. So we then represent the level of hazard from very low through to low, medium and high. And we do that for each administrative unit too, within every country. And it's based on global data initially, and where local data or national data is available, then we bring that in and use that preferentially. At the moment we're quite reliant on global data for several of the hazards, and we're currently funding various research institutes, insurance firms to release data for the purposes of this. So some of that data will be openly available. Some of the commercial data will have some restrictions, but all the data used in this tool sit within the GeoNode, the Innovation Labs GeoNode. So any open data that we pay to be created or converted for this purpose will be available to any other stakeholders or modelers through the GeoNode. So a big part of the tool is this text on the left-hand side. So the map allows people to see the geographic distribution of hazard, but the text on the left-hand side gives people an idea of how frequently damage might occur in their chosen location, and it gives some background into how hydrometeorological hazards might be changed in terms of under climate change scenarios, and it gives recommendations on how to reduce risk from each hazard. So that might be, and bearing in mind this tool is for use in the initial planning stage, it might be a recommendation to contact local organisations who work on river flood in that location. And we're working on actually providing lists of contacts in each country for each hazard at the moment for the next version. So it might be contact engineers in the location, it may be consider what type of impact on landslide that your road excavation might have in the local area. Consider what infrastructure, what routes into hospitals, what ports might be available or present in the area, and how those might be affected by the hazard. And consider those in your project planning, whatever that project might be. We also provide a list of further resources that are hazard and location specific, so people can go and find more specific tools. So for Afghanistan, for example, we might include a link to IMMAP data or the IMMAP tool, so people can then go and use that to go the next stage and do a risk assessment, having realised which hazards exist and the level of those hazards. And it's not too clear on this slide, but at the bottom we have a user feedback form where people can provide feedback on really anything in the tool, whether the hazard levels look wrong, whether they're aware of data that isn't included in the tool and that we might like to include. As we're not aware of all the data out there, it really needs to be a community effort to get enough data into these types of data sets. And it might be further resources, or it might be questions on on what can I do next, and how can I find further information beyond what's in this tool. Just to go back to this one, we purposely put every hazard on the same page, so that if somebody's going there knowing about river flood and looking at projects and how to deal with that project or deal with that river flood risk in that project, they can then see, oh, there's landslide risk as well, maybe I should think about that. There's also cyclone or earthquake risk. Because, it was mentioned earlier, people still build facilities in floodplains. Well, I've heard of projects where people are aware of the floodplain and the flood risk there, so they've moved the project. But what they weren't aware of is that where they moved the project to, there was a seismic hazard, a higher seismic hazard in that area. So they're building a project to protect against one risk and not another. So this is designed to provide some awareness and education of the different hazards that might exist in an area. So that's kind of where I finished. Just to summarise really, this Think Hazard tool and the InnoSafe tool are all part of an effort to communicate the complex hazard data that requires time and resource to learn how to use and really get the most out of into a more simple delivery mechanism and communication mechanism, so that people who are expert in humanitarian issues or maybe not in interpreting hazard data can actually access that and use that. So hopefully this can be useful in the humanitarian sector. It's an open source code entirely available on GitHub. We've had conversations with various organisations who are interested to take the architecture and display slightly different information or different recommendations that might be specific to an organisation based on their workflows or documentation or standards, and we're doing that for the World Bank at the moment. And it can also be tailored to other hazards, other risks, so it could be built around dealing with conflict specifically, or migration issues. So the architecture is there and it's designed to be as flexible as possible and developed by others if that's of interest. So thank you.
Thanks to you. Let's go straight to the room. We still have around 10 minutes for questions. Yes, please.
So I was trying to answer your question about how do you have people use more your Afghanistan map?
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking maybe on the usability side, it's good to have something like is simple, like I want to plan something in that space, and what kind of hazard are in that space, and that's exactly what Stuart has presented with the Think Hazard. And then I was thinking, like, maybe sometimes we overlook risks. We think about one risk and we overlook other risks. So I don't know if you have considered something like that.
We have that as well, but it's about for your InnoSafe. It's a fantastic tool. How many people are using this, and how many products are you generating, and who's using it? Because do you have statistics in that? Because that is, I notice within the humanitarian sector, you have hundreds of tools, and nobody can tell you, we spent $500,000 making this, but we can't tell you how many people are using it.
There are, I don't know off the top of my head, there are obviously through the project numbers of people who've been trained on InnoSafe and an organisation using it, and that is something that's tracked by the InnoSafe team. For this particular project, we track where users are and website hits, but this was discussed in one of the speed geeking sessions with Map Action and how they track users of the maps in the field, and we're having the same problem. We don't know what this is being used for, and it's something that we may build into the user feedback. But yeah, it's a good question.
We currently have 70 organizations using it with 250 users, making approximately 600 mapping products a month. That's actually not bad. But of those we only count 450 because it's very nice that the university in Australia makes a mapping product. It is not relevant unless they work on a consulting project, but we don't know. We only track really the humanitarian and the governmental actors. Now, we don't see, or the users of those tools is still very much at the individual interest level. It's not yet part as most of us, if we do any type of research, oh, I don't know this, I use Google, I go to Wikipedia, I get a result. And as long as your tools are not ingrained within the corporate knowledge, at some point it will die unless you keep on investing in training and doing these. And because you train people, we also train people, but sometimes I notice they're not using it. So we spend 3 days of
so we've tried to with this make it as simple as possible. At the moment we're discussing within the World Bank how to bring it into processes. World Bank are using the Climate Change Knowledge Centre to bring in climate knowledge into every project, and there's kind of an obligation for project managers, task team leaders to visit that site to retrieve climate information, and we're trying to do the same with this, so to build it into a reporting mechanism so that within the World Bank certainly it can be used in that way. We've had various conversations with people who want to tailor it to their own use and do similar. So, but yeah, absolutely understand. Yeah.
But that's where the stick comes in, right? So you have internally a requirement, guys. If you want to execute this project, you have to go there and look at the parameters. For us, it's the same. We have our estimates. They're the most accurate available. So as before a donor distributes money, by the way, please give us these numbers based on this tool. But you need that support, because if you don't have it, you don't have a stick. Money is always a good tool.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm also wondering, like, if I type in Google flood risk displays, do your results come up on the result page of Google? Because that's how you can have people.
Let's put it this way. My research on Afghanistan flood risk was for many years #1 in Google. You Google Afghanistan flood hazard stuff, my results come on there. It's very nice, but it doesn't imply that people are using your data to avoid building infrastructure projects. And at the Geneva level, most organizations have really smart people, but they're working for 50 countries and they're understaffed essentially to tackle the crisis. Within the countries, let's say within Afghanistan, some organizations, they only have a UN agency, only has 2 or 5 international staff. They can't do these analysis. They don't have the time, and the local staff, their quality of training is not sufficient. And even if you give them the training, perhaps the motivation is lacking to actually use it, because it takes time to convince people to use these tools.
Just one example, after the earthquake in Haiti in 2010, some UN agency had the idea to make an area map and say, like, okay, everything is destroyed, now let's try to rebuild in a nice way and rebuild where the risk are the less important. And so they made this map with like red, yellow and green areas, and said to the inhabitants, if you go and build your house in the red sector, you are not going to get any money. If you go to the green sector, you are going to get money. And if you go in the yellow, you are going to get a little less money. So that was incitation for the inhabitants to rebuild. Immediately when they said that, there was a general how to say, revolt, like
Outcry.
uprising, yeah. Because they answered, okay, like this is so unfair because we have nowhere else to go. So basically, what you are gonna do is making something not fair because some, like, my neighbor is gonna get money, I'm not gonna get money because I have no other place to build my house, and there is the only place left in the town, and so it doesn't work. So they had to stop everything and say, okay, we will just give the same amount of money to everybody. So even and usually most of the projects don't go that far that they can actually present something to the inhabitants, because the problem is not just that you have a tool, you have the map, and you can just do it. Even in this case, like, people could actually accept and say, yeah, but there are some other things coming in the process, like values or like, yeah, but like the environment. If they don't have any other place to build, why? I mean, like, how are they going to do? Like, there are, if for example the peasants don't have any more resources because the agriculture was destroyed and they have to move to the city, and the only place left are near the rivers, and they know that there are floods, but they have no other place to go. And you tell the politicians, here you should not build, here you should not build, yeah, but like at some point the solution is not so clear, and you cannot just say here is a map and so here is a solution and that's it. Like, there are other parameters that comes in the process and make the tool not working. And I think that's not only about the people wanted or not wanting to use the tool, but it's also because it's much more complex than just a problem, a solution.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
It's we exactly had the same. We're UNHCR. They're building a refugee camp. I think 15 or 25,000 people, middle of flood zone. Everybody's aware of it. There's simply no other land available, and so what are you supposed to do? At the other hand, another example, and that's a bit depressing. A UN agency. They were investigating a valley. They had to build 5 schools. In the first 3 villages or 2 villages, there was flood zones where the locations where the villagers were saying, build it here. Okay. Then an avalanche area, then another flood zone, another avalanche area. And the international team were doing these investigations. Why come all these farmers want to build their local small primary school in a flood zone? This can't be a coincidence. Because farmers, they know their area. They're not stupid. And they are not. They actually did the math. When projects like this are being built, very often the human resources, the constructors, those are the farmers. They get employment for the next 3 to 5 months. Half the village is employed. Wonderful. Now, if you build it in a flood zone, the UN assures these facilities. It's wonderful. Then after 5 or 6 years, you can rebuild it again, and then again you have your villages employed. It's very cynical, but that, I mean, I didn't investigate, but that was the feedback I got from the UN, and it's something to take into account. The farmers did their math. It made perfect economical sense. But from a UN perspective, you're investing money. Of course, it doesn't. You want to build a school once for the next 20 years.
Yeah, all these open data and these tools, they're great for improving awareness and understanding and giving that evidence base, but there are so many of the issues that you can't just take this tool and go. There's so many different layers.
You showed this open source data, right, where you have people digitizing. That's, of course, functioning very well if you have a lot of empathy during a crisis. But how do you do that? I need to do a road network in Afghanistan. Currently I'm employing staff to do that because I don't think there's the interest. There's so much crisis going on where...
Yeah. So the open data for resilience works within the context of other projects largely. So where there is a need for that data, they might go and leverage the community or the authorities' interest in getting that data to fund this project in that location and try to do it in a more inclusive and open way so that it can be maintainable and kind of become self-sustaining.
Because you mentioned during your presentation that you're working with the local government, it's always about collaborating, and I think it's
ideally.
Yeah, it's fantastic, but don't many of these projects then end up being going from one meeting to the other meeting, and half a year later you have nothing to show for?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, a lot of them don't happen as collaboratively as you would like. Still, a lot of these risk assessments are done through consultants, engineering firms or remote sensing firms who are encouraged to work with a local partner. And inevitably, the workshops, they don't go from meeting to meeting because it's not, that's still a part of the project, not the whole thing. So, yeah, there's some balance to be had there, and I don't think we have the balance right.
But are there already results, and well, what makes the most economical sense, the pure consultant approach or this? Probably best is a mixture, but
good question. Yeah, mixture.
But
and what level of mixture? I don't know.
Because to make that statement, that thing is outdated. Let's not do that. Let's go for the new way. There need to be some metrics to back that up.
Yeah, well, we know from doing risk assessments in the same or similar places with using OpenStreetMap, we have a more recent data set rather than a census data set. So it's the common sense approaches like that rather than measuring individual metrics a lot of the time.
Sure.
How about using the power of natural language processing and Watson kind of I'm not sure if it's artificial intelligence or
you need the data.
But you have the data, and
yeah,
you have the data, you have the methodology, and
Guys, we will have to stop because I think we will be late for the lightning talks. So maybe we continue in smaller groups.